but its willingness to produce order is of course something highly questionable, because the first step in producing some sort of order would be these typological categories that we all know too well. Of course, you could use different methods of ordering buildings by material, by their energy, efficiency, and all that. So it's in a way, it's a completely contingent method of putting an ordering grid over something that is as colorful as almost the whole knowledge of human mankind, of architecture. So it's a very strange idea of going back to this typological idea of giving order to architectural knowledge. And of course, it reminds us of Linnaeus and his, so to say, invention of natural sciences, with all these lists of putting the found species into order, and in biology this taxonomical ordering is still valid today. And it also, of course, has then this idea of, if you collect anything of significance and you study it very precisely, you come up with all the best and most beautiful and most significant ideas, of course, and then you can extract from this collection of material the elements that will then be used if you have a certain ideology for the composition, like Leibniz, of course, finally it was a divine a recreation of God's combinational gift. If you have a certain ideology, then of course you can make these elements be a composition again. And in the case of Durand, it was not aesthetics but only economy. And you all know these ways of how to have the right vestibules and what sort of staircases are of interest, how to produce courtyards. And of course there is this improvement element, so it was he had no problem suggesting that St. Peter's could, of course, have been way more economic with the same basic layout. So the ideology behind it was pure economic, and in a sense, this seems very contemporary. But on the other hand, what this approach to architecture, what architecture produces, is some sort of overmining. And overmining, in contrast to undermining, I mean, like in the case of Durand and also with Fritz Haller that I'm going to show you, that you overestimate the power of architecture to reproduce the whole of the world. And Fritz Haller is an example, is a modern example of actually a bit of Durand's aspect. You of course know the USM Haller furniture, and which is of course a prerequisite for any architect's villa. Those furniture elements, they are all derived from the solution of this one joint. So it has this structuralist idea that if you solve three-dimensionally the question of the joint, you can of course expand this spatial grid into all three or even more directions, and you could go into the next scale, make a pre-fabricated steel constructing system that you could use to build schools, that you could use to build factory directors' villas, that you could use then going into the next scale, that you could use to recreate all the cities of the world. So in this case there is this, of course this is driven by this cybernetic, hilariously fetishizing this control, order, feedback loops it's called Einheit dritter Ordnung. It's for a city for 3 million inhabitants, and you could go to the next scale. So basically with infrastructure, if you have infrastructure in control, you could reproduce the whole globe, and not only the whole globe, you could of course also have this settlement for 1,000 dwellers in a planetary space. So this is of course, it reminds you of this 2001 artificial gravity spinning wheel in space. And so these questions of overmining architecture, so to say, deriving a theory that you could apply on almost any scale. You could caricate it with Cheng's clearly undermining approach, because what he's telling you here with this famous evolutionary tree of 20th century architecture is that, of course, architecture won't produce any surprises anymore. So what he's telling you here, and he upgraded or updated it in 2011, what he's telling you here is, okay, you do architecture, you're free to choose whatever you find here, because you find everything here that stylistically got turned in the 20th century or even in the 21st. But what he's telling you as well is that he highly doubts that architecture could either produce any form of utopian idea anymore, or that it could formally surprise you. So this pseudo-naturalistic organic tabulature shows you that fighting against this notion would be more or less futile. And of course this is undermining. So it's below or above this potential of architecture that I think is not possible to clearly define, and exactly that is what makes it of course so interesting. And another illustration of this idea that I like very much is this high-rise of home of James Wines in the early 80s, and it asks this question: is architecture about the structure, about this primary construction or infrastructure, or is it about the infill, this collection of styles of single-family homes, or is it somewhere in between? And this oscillation between these two poles, I think, is also something that I felt with the students is quite interesting in regards to the projects we're doing now. And what I would like to do now is go a bit into these typologies. And you see these 3 rows here. And the first row, I'm sorry that I didn't translate it yet, but I guess it's very clear. The first row says theater, museum, library, and state. And you could say that this first row is the classical, until the 19th century, national, bourgeoisie, monumental task of architecture to produce identity for a collective body. In the second row, you have more or less public buildings that work with some sort of control of the self that is based on your own free will, so to say. It is offices, it is recreation, it is religion, and it is retail, shopping. And in the third row, you have the institutional control, spaces that are being institutionally controlled or even totally controlled, which is a term that you would apply to a prison, you would apply to various other typologies that I will get further into. And the question that arises then is, of course, this representation of these typologies, or a representation that you could think of that would still be suitable or appropriate. And of course, it's very much a cliched icon of these typologies, and it uses this infographics of Uwe Neurath from the 30s, which was about this international system of pictorial graphics that could provide information for even illiterate people with very easily understandable symbols. So of course we have this type and typology question somehow in there, and with these three rows of typological collections, I go into into this calendar, which is again a list or a contingent ordering system of providing an approach, a visual approach that orders all those projects in these typological categories. And as you can clearly see, this is of course not at all scientific for various reasons. The first reason is that the projects fit the squares of the days, so they are not of the same scale, of course. The other one is that you could say, what does a calendar have to do with an example of architectural typologies? It's of course completely contingent. And the other thing is that it is a mixture of both more or less consensual, important historical pieces of architectural history, and on the other hand, it's projects that I thought that in the course of the lecture I would rather talk about this project or this project and not about this project. So it goes up to more or less contemporary examples of theaters, of course museums. You see the Kunsthaus in Graz as the last one, and luckily I don't get to this last one because I was stopped way too long, which I won't be doing today. Libraries, state or political party, also something that is quite interesting, that in the 20th century there is not a lot of examples of modern architecture that is doing this representational task for Parliament. Well, the next one is public buildings and the office buildings, for example. It is again various classical examples that are interspersed with some more quirky or some more obscure projects in office spaces. With recreation or leisure time, it's of course a topic that goes into park landscape architecture and all these infrastructural, larger scale projects as well. With religion, you have this collection that you could also immediately say, I'm missing this, that. So what it is about is, it is about trying to collect a number of projects that you could suggest could be a start if you deal with this and that typology, where you could research further into various projects. And what the lectures that I'm doing with that are they do have a certain further structuring method, which is different from topic to topic again. So it's, you see, it's all a bit complicated because it's at the same time it tries to make something precise, and at the same time it knows that this precision cannot be kept all the way through. And also, a lot of these topics, they have, of course, crossing threads. And the third one, which is this institutional control, starts with factories and goes then to educational projects, both university campus structures, but also So you see FU Berlin, the Met building, huge Met building on the right, is put into the same month of October with the school of Niedermarant, with the Learning Center of Sana. So it's a pretty wild collection. And it becomes even more doubtful with this topic of control. This will be the one that I, in the course, will get a bit closer to. Also in relation to the asylum, and also in hospitals where all these typologies of disciplinary control up to the 19th century, they meet with the hospital, with the colleagues, with the casernes of the military, with prisons, and so all of these, and even monasterial buildings, they of course share the same genetic code. And yeah, so this is the work that I'm trying to use in both the lectures and in the course of design seminars. And to go a bit further into this question, or into this, of course, very, very complicated question of typology that is not clear yet. Of course, there is this visual composition that first gives you the idea of a certain objectiveness of the content that is being presented. And at the same time, you of course know that the Underkielerbecher were extremely aware of what they were doing. They were extremely conscious in the way that they composed their plates of those industrial or vernacular architectures. And it's the same with the terminology that you use to describe these elements. They are almost of the same importance as this extremely refined aesthetic of the tableau that they are forming. And at the same time, so to say, pre-intellectually, you of course have this immediate connection of this sharing code of these structures. And of course, this so to speak, common element is the typological problem, or the typological question, that is of course neither present in any one of them, but it is exactly the element that we use to combine them, to put them into a family of objects that share the same genetic code, so to say. And because of the second side in Botuzanino, this leisure recreational topic reminded me quite a lot. We were having that group of this idea of Arcadia, and of course this idea of what you are doing in Arcadia was of course the mythological Greek landscape where the people were not forced to work. So actually all that they had to do was spending their time leisurely, so to say. And of course this idea of what the qualities or what the experiential value of this leisure time is changes in the course of time and history, and also with that this idea that we had at Björk, and the idea of the sublime of nature, and also this question of in how far architecture acts as a framing device of nature as a pure and autonomous category of nature as an, of course, humanized and cultivated element, where the border of in and out, of course, can be blurred in the course of the decades. And the other aspect that I would quickly go into is, and we had this topic as well, about the heterotopias of Michel Foucault, and I would just very quickly get into this idea of the monastery or the cloister. And I guess all of you are familiar with this famous plan of the monastery of St. Carl that has never been built, but it is somehow an ideal plan of a completely autonomous community that, of course, provided hospitals for the ill or for the mentally ill, even for guests. They had gardens, they had agriculture, all the uses that you would suggest that an urban settlement needs to have a degree of autonomy were already laid out and designed in this ideal plan of St. Carl. And the other thing with this monasterial background that might be very interesting is that all the treatments of the mentally handicapped or lunatics, they were closely connected to the life of monks. It was monks that were the first, or for obvious religious reasons, they were the ones that took care of the weakest members of society, and the therapy for something that took until the end of the 18th century to become so to say, an illness, namely mentally handicapped people. The only treatment that the monasterial background provided for them was more or less the same as the monks by themselves were. The way that they live their lives, which is basically more et labore. So it is an extremely scheduled, very rigorous time plan where you work, you pray, and you go into seclusion. And this seclusion idea, of course, proved to be of a certain transcendental value for a monk, but for the mentally ill to make, or for the mentally ill, of course, make everything worse. The same like in prisons, the inmates that they were put into singular, what is that called in English? Single cells. This is was the worst thing that you could do. And another idea, the artists' colony like Monte Verita, which was rediscovered by Harald Seemann, is also something that reminded me a bit of the project that we are working on. And this also is, of course, something outside of the usual conventions of bourgeois society. And what the artists in the course of those decades on Monte Verita were dealing and working with was, of course, alternative lifestyles, alternative ways of enlightenment, working, agriculture, theater, nudity, culture, all these actually very modern, and of course the Bauhaus people came later on, and nowadays you could still, of course, visit Monte Verita and have some of this glorious past, of this famous past, as an experience in the hotel there. And so this idea is how to well, make or make not history come alive. And of course this is a very constructed and a very specifically framed process of design, which again reminded me of the project that we are doing, where we have to basically deal with these ruins or remnants of a past, where I think, as far as I heard, all agree that the thing about that is if you even leave them untouched, so that they just become ruins. So this is a very basic question of how to construct an identity for the master. So I will not be, I don't tell you, list you, of course, but the projects for children that are under institutional control are, of course, also a total control in an institutional sense that, again, can use the structure in a very generous or rigid way that becomes then, via the infill, via the furniture and the layout of these age-divided group rooms, extremely idiosyncratic and very, very specific and very human in scale. And just go through here, you of course are more than familiar with these projects. And what I would like to come up with, so you obviously see that I'm not that well prepared. Yeah, perhaps that is the summer camp in the times of the Soviet Union, which are very beautiful modernist structures on the Black Sea, in the Ukraine, which are, of course, in the Foucauldian sense, heterotopias. And I would then get into all this shared genetic code that we are familiar with. And I would just perhaps end with this interesting notion that all these panoptical prisons, that they actually never worked. So when you know that project of Kohlhaas, where he very graphically cuts with Buñuel through the eye of the panoptical center, and he's then superimposing a very recreational facility onto this couple prism. And the first sentence that he's writing is this panoptical prison is actually a bit of a disadvantage because it was never used as a panoptical prison. When they built it, they immediately released the people out of the cells, and the prison guards and the inmates, they shared all the infrastructural galleries and wandered around. So all this enormous weight that is being put on architecture as a control device of the disciplinary society of the 19th century, they become, of course, nowadays highly questionable. And one exception might be, of course, the concentration camp, where it's not about surveillance but about the machine gun that was being able to shoot into the rows. And then, coming more into contemporary decades, you would say that all those disciplinary techniques that architecture provides, they are, of course, being replaced by a way deeper form of control. So this physical harm or physical control, so that many people are being controlled by few people. This architectural constellation has, of course, been replaced by something that goes way, way deeper below the skin. And, of course, the most advanced efficiency of control is, of course, putting the controlling device into the body exactly like with the panoptical prison, it didn't matter if there was a cell guard in the middle, just by suspecting of being controlled, you would behave correctly. And nowadays, the most efficient organ of control is, of course, you and yourself, and the way that your biography and all that things that you impose by yourself are way more efficient than architecture could ever be. And of course, prisons nowadays resemble geriatric community housing, everything, so to say, what architecture was in a way scary has been, well, replaced by something that is actually very human, very nice. Of course, it still has certain borders and boundaries, but it has lost its scary aspects. That's perhaps all that I'm telling you for now. In case you are interested, I would love to give you more of the material that you could look through, but I stop for now. Thank you. It is this promise of getting to the core immediately.
And my question is, you in 1 hour and 100 images, you don't speak about the form.
I'm sorry?
You never talk about the form.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, because in this lecture right now, this is the blind spot, and this would exactly be going into the projects and then re-describe with words the elements that you see. So this is it's a way of training the terminology with still more or less consensually used. Like in German, it's a gebundener Grundriss, which is saying a confined floor plan, and which is something different from a floor plan that has an open shape and all these elements that so you see it's a very boring lecture, of course, because I'm taking this project and what I'm doing is I describe the plans, I go into section and I show perhaps some pictures in, but it's all about this composition of how a certain function or even a non-function, because of Renaissance architecture, it's of course extremely flexible over the centuries, can provide a framework, well, for architecture. And the question then, it was this idea of structure and infill, of course. The more generic it gets, the more open it is for any infill that we could think of.
But my curiosity was more because the typology was used in Italy as an anti-functionalist approach, but formalist approach, in the good sense of form.
Yeah.
And if I look at the etymology of typologies that came from typos, that in Greek means, I don't know how is the impronta.
Strike.
No, the impronta, or the foot of the sand. It's like that. And also a bridge on member of the sand. This is a target. And means something that you can reproduce. And was used in typography in the 17th century, in Manunzio, like something that had one significance, the letter L, the letter N, the letter N, that it's reconcilable by the form. As an anti-functional use for difference from the leaf. Those two categories, title and leaf. Title is form, pure form, and the leaf is the form that is directly hieroglyph function.
I think, if I'm getting it right, this of course refers to this consensual use of signifier for signifying certain things, and this is what, if I'm right, what Rossi was about. It is of course completely anti-functional. It's just about this recognizability of a certain form that of course belongs to the language of the city, and the city is the repertoire, or the repository where you take everything from. So everything that you could do is already existing, of course, and you just choose very, very, well, in Moses' case, very intuitively what to add to this already existing language. And in the course of history, it was, of course, first it was humanism that was this over and undermining theory on typology, and then it was, in the Industrial Revolution, it was the machine, and postmodernism, it was supposed to be the city. And I think that this is, of course, a problem right now, because the urban condition is so ubiquitous that nobody could think of, well, anything that you could use in order to make a contradistinction or a contrast to that. I think this is also, in my feeling, what was at the first day of our excursion, when it was so very, very clear of what you could do in the first site with this wonderful structure that is existing there. And then, of course, it's like, wow, what are you doing in the open landscape? Because it clearly doesn't work with this repository that we are used to. I guess perhaps this is also why this theory of standing, point and feet, and all this mapped urbanism was, of course, becoming very, very popular since the mid-90s, this rediscovery of all these 70s mapped structuralism, because it did not refer to this sort of postmodern urban conception of collective. And of course, this, I think, when I'm handy, of course, I think this directs us into the question of monumentality, which is a representation of nowadays a collective that consists of numerous minorities that they all want to project their identity into. So what is this collective question? Could it be like, I'm tending to the idea that we could only use a surrealist approach in order to arrive at something that has this tension. I think Baku is doing that in a very beautiful and convincing way, of bringing up this tension, of putting together things that are at times counterintuitive or at times even contradicting, and spanning a certain tension that is, of course, a tension that is not clearly, that is not even interesting to pursue in a logic way. It's very much Okay, thanks. Yeah,